All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday at 10 a.m. Your favorite host, Tim and Tim, are back again with another guest, Jason Velie. Jason, Tim, how you guys doing today?
Good.
I'll go
Thanks.
first. Oh, I
I
thought
guess
we were
that
going
was
to sit
bad.
there
We
and
should
look.
have done that at the same time then. Next
Yeah,
time
I
I'll do
think
it.
I felt like we were going to sit there and look at each other for a second. So hey, I'm doing good. Can't complain. And hey, Jason, your turn.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the Tim and Tim show. I look forward to it. Doing great. Lots of deals going on. Excited to be in the business and to be here with you guys this morning.
Yeah, man. Well, all right. So we were talking a little bit before we kind of went live here. So I'm going to give a quick little intro, but Jason, I want you to kind of explain a little bit more in depth your story, how you got into real estate and where you are today. Just kind of let everybody know who you are. So, Jason, I know you're local, you're Wilmington, local. Sorry, you're local to me. You're a local Wilmington guy. I know you do some fix and flips. You've done a ton of seller finance apartment complexes in like places like Burgaw and in other, kind of in the greater Wilmington MSA area. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody how you got it started into the real estate world and what are you working on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to UNCW, graduated in December of 15 with my finance degree. From there, I went to work with a large investment firm as a licensed financial advisor. Did that for a short time before going to work with institutional trust funds, specifically in the death care industry, so pre-need funeral trust and cemetery perpetual care trusts. Truthfully, very boring stuff, but because it's such a niche, highly regulated industry, it paid very, very well. And so I had a dream job for the last, 4 to 6 years in those roles with that company, where it was a very flexible 6-figure career. My bosses were awesome. They didn't care when I worked or when I was in the office because I got my job done. Truthfully, a dream job. And that flexibility is kind of what allowed me to start doing this real estate stuff on the side. So about 3.5 years ago, October of 19, is when I bought my first property. And at first I just thought I was going to do this the slow, boring way where I would save up money for a down payment and buy a property and then as a rental, and then save up more money a few years later and buy another one. And then maybe by the time I was retired, I would have 20 or 30 paid off properties and, be well off in retirement. And that first property that I bought to be intended as a rental was a dog. I had no idea what I was doing. It was a mess. The home inspector missed everything that he should have seen. And I thought I was protected by having the inspection done. I was very wrong. The contractor screwed me over for 16 grand. It was a mess of a situation. However, the saving grace there was that along the same time that I was buying that property was when somebody had introduced me to the Bigger Pockets podcast. And that's when I started listening and learning things about hard money lenders and private lenders and things like that. And so I knew that if I find good enough deals, I can find these lenders that will fund 100% of the purchase price and the rehab budget. And because of that, I bought my very next deal the next month. So that was October when I bought that terrible rental. And then November is when I closed on the next property, which became my first flip, which was a double wide in Rocky Point. For those of you that don't know, that's just north of Wilmington, where I live. So I think it was a good thing that I didn't yet know how bad of a deal the first property was, because I was only a month into it so far. Otherwise, that probably would have really discouraged me and possibly prevented me from even doing another deal. So I think there was a little bit of a blessing that, the ignorance is bliss, if you will. So that first flip that I did was just a little double wide that was $60,000, $10,000 rehab. I found a hard money lender that funded the full $70,000, so I didn't need any of my own money. And then after paying the private money fees and the contractor and all that stuff, after a 10-day rehab and selling it, I walked away with a little over $26,000 net profit at the end of the day. And that was really the proof of concept for me. And so I just started slowly picking up a few more flips here and there. And at some point, I had one flip that I got for dirt cheap and came across my first 8-unit apartment complex to buy. Was able to structure the closing far enough out so that I could sell the first little flip in 1031 exchange for the down payment on the 8-unit. And I don't know how far you want me to continue, but basically my entire business model from the beginning has been flip single family, buy and hold apartments.
Yeah, it's fun. I think that's actually when I first met you, was like you had made that post, like we knew of each other on social media, and then you were still working in the W-2 job, and we ended up going, meeting for lunch at that taco place or whatever it was. But that was shortly after you had just closed that deal, and I remember sitting there being like, "Yeah, man, when are you going to quit your job? When are you going to quit your job?" And you were like, "Oh, I love my job, man. It's so super flexible. Like it's not a problem. This, that, and the other thing." And we kind of got into that, and lo and behold, maybe 6 to 12 months later, you were like, "This is really holding me back." And I was like, "I told you."
You did. I can confirm you definitely did. But also, I was like, Tim, you have no children.
I know you got like 4 little ones, right?
Right. So, and my wife isn't working anymore. She's a dental hygienist, but she doesn't work anymore. And so that was the main goal, was to make sure, for the sake of my family, that before I quit the day job, I had enough passive rental net cash flow coming in from the apartments to more than cover all of our living expenses and health insurance, et cetera, so that if the market collapsed and I was not able to flip any houses for 2 or 3 years, we would still be safe without either one of us having to go back and get a W-2.
Yeah. It's super, super powerful, and totally understand and respect the position, obviously.
Yeah, man, that's really good stuff. And I, if you wanted to keep going, I'm sure there's people listening here that are just like writing it down. It's like, oh wait a minute, this is my roadmap. He's just calling it out right here.
I love the model, man. Like you got to create equity somehow, which you're doing in flipping houses, and then you turn around and buying apartment complexes. I love it.
Yeah. I tell folks all the time, man, like you're spot on. It's like, however you create your bankroll, if you will.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you. Right. I mean,
right.
Yeah. There are guys in their W-2 jobs that are just using that extra discretionary income, if you will, to do the exact same thing, right? You're doing it with flips. I did some of the same stuff, man. That's good stuff. I love the fact that you didn't let that first one get in the way, or maybe like you said, like it hadn't happened yet, so you were like, oh, okay, let me go get another one before I'm even done with the first one.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
but hey, man, looking back on it, it's like, hey, maybe there's a reason, right?
That's a common theme, though. I mean, I can't remember who it was exactly, but we had somebody else on like maybe 2 months ago now. It's a while ago, and they were talking about the same thing, and how a contractor like took like 60 grand or something, like a significant amount of money. And not for nothing, I mean, 16,000, 60,000. Like when you're first getting started, that's a significant amount of money, right? I mean, that can make or break your whole career if the first one doesn't go marginally okay. You're like, wait a second, like this is my entire nest egg. I can't go risk this again. I've already tried to do that once, and I potentially could have lost everything. I'm not going to go do that again. So, but I think the common theme is, though, that people that continue to educate and learn and figure out what they did from their mistakes and tried again, found success. And once you find that success, it gets easier and easier and easier and easier. Like you have better connections, you have more experience, better access to debt and banks and private lenders, and all of the things start to get significantly easier and easier and easier when you have that track record to back you up. And if you quit, it would have never happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, it happens to the best of us, man. Yeah. And no matter how long you're doing this, like you're gonna, if there's a bad actor out there, there's not much you can do about it. Other than just try to stay on top of it.
I would go as far as to say that everyone will lose money some way, shape, or form eventually.
Sure.
Right. It might not be a lot of money, or it may be a lot of money. Hell, I did one of those online e-stores, and I lost like 50K. Right. I mean, I've lost money, but that didn't like set me back and, say, hey, I'm going to stop doing these entirely. Right. Like, I found other ways to make money. But if I looked at that and said, if I'm an investor and I lost $50,000, I'm not going to invest anymore. No, now I got to go make $50,000 again to get back to zero.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason, I have
Yeah,
certainly
yeah,
lost my
that's
share. Oh, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I was just gonna that's that competitive nature in us
Yeah.
entrepreneurs that rather than failing, we get angry and competitive, and we're like, oh, okay, now I have to go do one, and that's what happened for me every time. Every time I lose out on a great opportunity, like I just almost get a great little complex under contract or an awesome beach house at a great deal, and then it doesn't happen, or the seller changes their mind or whatever, and I get so disappointed. It instead of just sitting there pouting, it like I use that frustration to motivate me to go. I'm like, no, I'm a sore loser, and when it
Oh,
comes to being an
totally.
entrepreneur,
That's a
that's a very big positive.
that's the best explanation I've ever heard of that. I am a sore loser, so I am gonna keep going until I get what I want. I love that.
Exactly.
That's
But
funny though. I
and
mean,
two, I want to throw out with when it comes to like that example of that first property. I think obviously everything that we do is going to take some level of risk, and I just want to point out that even though that was a risk, and even though I didn't have money to renovate it because I didn't think it needed a bunch of renovations because I didn't know what I was looking at, it was still a calculated risk. I knew that because the way I funded that was I took a 401k loan and let that money season for a couple of months in my bank account. And then I went and got a 15% down investment property loan from my local credit union. But since it was such a small purchase price, my total PITI was like $352 a month. So
whoa.
I knew that worst case scenario, if I can't rent this, I can cover that extra little monthly payment. And it's a good thing that I did that and I calculated that risk because that's what I had to do. I sat on that for 2 years paying
Sure.
the mortgage on a vacant property for 2 years before I had the money to be able to do some renovations and then resell it. And then at the end of the day, even after all that, I only broke even
Mm.
at best. So, I think, Tim, I know you're Vitali, you're at least a lot like me. I don't know Vest well enough to say, but I know we're financially minded in that, people always ask me, well, how do you get over analysis paralysis or, how do you know what to do or how do you take the risk? And for me, it's a little bit more black and white. Like my answer to people is I do what the numbers tell me to do. And
Hmm.
if I can, particularly when it comes to the single family flips, if I can buy a house cheap enough that I know that if everything that can goes wrong does go wrong, the septic fails, the well fails, we got to drill a new well, put a new septic system, redo the plumbing on the entire house unexpectedly. If all of that stuff goes wrong and I still can't lose money, then I feel safe. I mean, sure, yeah, I've had some instances where all those things did go wrong and I made a whole lot less money than what I wanted to, but it's all about buying good enough deals to mitigate most, if not all, of your risk.
Yeah, I mean that's where I came up with my company name, Upside Capital, right? I was reading Sam Zell's book, and Sam Zell talks about how people like to overcomplicate investing, right? Essentially, analysis paralysis. And his simple line that I read that made me come up with with my company name was, "If the downside can be measured and mitigated, and the upside is exponential, do the deal." Right. I mean,
I
that's
love it.
exactly what you're doing in the numbers. Like, if you're measuring the downside risk of the septic going bad and replumbing a new roof, and that's measuring your risk, right? If you can identify your risk, you can put together a plan on how to mitigate that risk, and then you still can make money on the back end. You do the deal, and it doesn't matter if it's a real estate deal or investing in stocks or oil and gas, whatever you're investing into, right? If you can mitigate and measure the downside risk and the upside is exponential, just do the deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of it sometimes just comes down, Jason, to like,
Yep.
you're asking like, how do you get over that analysis paralysis? How do you have the confidence to do it? Some of it just comes down to like, what are you willing to do? Right. Like
Yes.
if all those things go wrong
Yeah.
and, like, what are you willing to show up and do? Um, and Tim, you just mentioned stocks. Like that's one of the things I love about this real estate stuff is like, I buy a stock. I can't walk over to Tesla and say, Elon, move over. You're not performing the way I want you to.
Yeah.
I got some
Elon, why'd you
ideas.
smoke that joint the other day, man?
Yeah. I can't do that. But like if my GC walks off the job, if something's not going right, if I'm a little bit over budget, like I can physically show up on that property and do things, right? I
Mhm.
can do things to try to, get it back on the right track,
It's some element of control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm willing to do it. I'm willing
Right.
to show up at 9
And
o'clock at night and pick up a
uh,
hammer and do whatever I got to do.
yeah, and like Jason, like where you said you measured your downside risk of like the monthly payment. Am I okay with if this goes completely belly up, paying this $300 a month indefinitely until I can right the ship? Like,
Yep.
yeah, that's something I could live with. I mean, that's like,
Yep.
I mean, you got 4 kids. What's that? One trip to Costco? At the end of the day, like, yeah, okay, I can afford an
If
extra
you're
trip to
lucky.
Costco.
That's
It
a
really is.
that's a trip to see the latest, movie. I mean,
Right.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
with 4 kids.
$40 popcorn bag. Yeah, but like if you look at it in that perspective, you're like, if all things go wrong, I can still turn out okay in this situation, right? And no, a lot of people ask me that question as well. It's like, well, how do you say yes to a deal or not? It's like, well, I can't tell you if it's your yes or my yes because my risk factor is completely different from somebody else's. For example, when it comes to developing land, I don't have the risk tolerance to buy a piece of land, go through zoning, entitlement, architectural plans, blah, 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 blah. I don't have that risk tolerance for somebody at the city to just be like, nah, I don't want you to do this anymore, and me lose $100,000 that I put into that. I don't have that risk tolerance, not yet at least. Maybe one day in the future, but that is a deal that I'm not willing to do because I'm not willing to risk losing $100,000 if somebody at the state changes their mind or the city planning changes their mind or whatever, right? And that might be an abstract or stretched out example, but you get the principle of the concept, right? In your example, it was the $300 a month, whatever. Like everyone's risk tolerance is going to be different at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
All right. So let's dig into a little bit more of how are you sourcing and funding your multifamily deals now? I mean, we're at the here I'm just going to throw out some generalizations here, Jason, is we're at the peak of a market, things are going to crash and burn, interest rates keep going up, but yet everyone seems to be doing deals around me right now. And I know you love these smaller seller finance deals. Talk to us a little bit about how are you finding your deals now? How are you funding them? What's something that somebody that's listening to this could take away from this conversation and implement in order to try to replicate what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess first I'll give you a quick little breakdown of the 4 complexes, and then I can walk through how they're found and funded. So the first one was the 8-unit complex in Burgal that I bought by myself. Actually, I guess I'll just talk about them, as we get to them. So that one, I actually funded with a commercial loan through a local credit union. So I had to put 20% down. My purchase price was $450,000. I had to bring $90,000 for the purchase price. The craziest part about that is I had bought a $15,000 single wide trailer with land from a wholesaler. Don't ask me how they got it cheap enough to do that. I don't know. And did nothing to it. And then 4 months later, sold it for $98,000 to a cash buyer, did a 1031 exchange. So my net proceeds from that sale were a little over $90,000. So did a 1031 exchange to use that as the down payment for that apartment complex, which, mind you, I borrowed the $15,000 from somebody else to buy the trailer in the first place. So I used somebody else's $15,000 to buy
I
an
love it.
apartment complex with $700,000 worth of equity that's generating, $3,000 net a month in cash flow. So that was normal. The fact that I had my W-2 job as well still in place definitely helped from a financing standpoint on that one. The next one was my friend and local wholesaler, Chris Monty. He did text blast campaigns. I think he was using batch leads at the time. And he just pulled lists of multifamily owners, sent out 1,000 texts a day, and filtered through those responses and followed up with any, decent responses. And he got a hold of this one a little bit north of Asheboro in a town called Randleman. It's about 3 hours away from me. And the seller right out of the gate wanted to seller finance. But Chris, not having any experience with multifamily underwriting, operations, et cetera, he kicked it over to me and was just like, hey, can you take a look at this, see if it looks like it's worth, digging deeper into. And the guy right out of the gate, it's for a 16 unit complex. And that's, C plus class. And he was asking 950, which was already a pretty good deal as it was, but he wanted a seller finance. He wanted 10% down. I think he was asking 5% interest on a 20-year term, I believe, but we negotiated that, and we gave him his purchase price, but we negotiated it down to 8% down payment, so $75,000 down payment, 4% interest, 26-year term fixed with no balloon.
Wow.
So yeah. So now the downside, the caveat there is he wants this income guaranteed for retirement. So he wanted there to be a prepayment penalty equal to the remaining balance of all future interest payments if we
Yield
ever paid it
maintenance
off.
at the end of the day.
Right, which is, some, $350,000, $400,000 right now if we were to pay it off, which there's enough equity in the deal already that we could get out of it and fine and wash our hands if we needed to. But what we got him, I told him, I said, the only way we can do that is if we have in the contract that we are allowed to assign that loan to somebody else. If, say, we decided 5 years from now we want to sell it, that whoever buys it from us is allowed to assume that loan from us with you without your approval or permission or your own underwriting of that buyer. And he was okay with that. He agreed to it. So that's how we structured that deal. That property manager is amazing, keeping expenses so low, doing an incredible job, bumping rents up. That one's been going way better than expected. It's already netting us I think over $4,000 a month. So $2,000 a piece, because Chris and I are 50-50 on that one.
Mhm.
So that's how that one was found. That was the text blast campaign. We negotiated seller finance. The next one was the one we just closed on 2 weeks ago, the 20 units in Burgaw. Chris found that the same way, the text blasting, and he got in contact with the seller, and the seller was like, hey, we're actually about to sell this. Why don't you contact our agent? And so Chris gets up with the agent. The agent hadn't even started the process to prepare any of the listing docs or the OM yet. So it was perfect timing to snag a little pocket listing. And the agent said they were going to be asking 1.75. So again, Chris kicks it over to me and asks, to take a look. And I knew as soon as he said that price, I was like, I know what stuff out there is selling for. That's already a pretty good deal. Let's look further into it. And the broker was super inexperienced, just really doesn't have much experience in multifamily. A sweetheart, though. She was great to work with, but we were able to negotiate the price all the way down to 1.6. And so we ended up going back to that same local credit union that funded my first 8 units. And I went to them and said, hey, we got this under contract at 1.6. What can you do for us? They ended up doing a commercial loan, 20% down, 7% interest, 25-year AM, but with a 5-year balloon. And so Chris and I ended up partnering on that. I'm 65%, he's 35 on that one. And now they structured that first one on that 8 unit a little bit different. The credit union did. They did, I think it was like 4.25% interest. It was only a 20-year AM, and they had a 15-year balloon, but the interest rate was only locked for 5 years, and then it relocked at the new rate for the next 5 years, and then relocked again for the third 5 years. So there, it was a little different how they did that. But on this last one, the 20 units, they just did a 5-year balloon rather than a rate reset. So those are the ones that we own now. It's 44 doors total, or if I take out Chris's ownership percentage, that's 29 doors owned completely by myself. And I'm also under contract, hopefully close mid next week, on a 15 unit in Havelock, which is a couple hours away. And that's going to be a full gut rehab, taking it down to the studs, redoing everything. But the same lenders that loan on all my single family flips, they're going to fund me the full $600,000 for the 350 purchase and 250 rehab.
Nice.
So I'll be in around 600, maybe 650. It should be worth somewhere around 1.25 when it's done. And I'm buying that one myself. So that will put my ownership percentage up to about 44 doors weighted after that. So
Nice.
at that point, I just have to determine, do I keep those and do I refinance and keep them, or do I sell and 1031 into something else? I don't know what the right answer is yet. I think it depends on a few things, but yeah.
Man, I
Is that
love
what you wanted to hear?
absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
I love the way that no one deal fits this round hole, right? For you, it's every deal's different, every seller's different, all of them are unique. And hey, I think I mean, Tim Vest is probably tired of hearing me talking about that 24 unit I own in Florence. I'm always waffling between selling it and not. I mean, my cost basis, like I could refinance it with 50% leverage and get all my money back, right? It's like, you start looking at return on equity and or potential future upside equity on the deal. And it's, I'm in the position now where I want to continue to grow that equity. So yeah, I mean, the deal's cash flowing very well, but I don't know how much more equity is going to create over the next 5 years. So it's kind of like flatlining a bit. So I'm like, okay, well, for me, I'm like, all right, well, let's get out of it and move that into something else and continue to grow it. I don't want it to plateau just yet. So it's a difficult conversation. And, I think it really opens up your eyes to having those conversations with different sellers about what their needs are in terms of seller financing and trying to get them to get a deal done, right? It's like you don't know where you are at what point in your career or what they need out of the deal, for retirement benefits or, equity growth or 1031 exchanges or whatever, right? So, we talk about it all the time, listening to what other people need in order to provide a solution to their problem. And it sounds like you're a master genius at this with all the different creative seller financing deals that you've been able to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When are you going to write a book?
Yeah, Jason, the other thing I like too, man, is like there's no one size fits all, right? Like you see a lot of people getting this thing and they're like 100 units and up only, right? Like that's all they're going after. But you're kind of showing like, hey man, I don't need that to create the cash flow that I'm looking for to get the deals done and things. I mean, you talked about your one property, what'd you say, 20 units, and it's throwing off like 4,000 a month cash flow. Hey, you can do this 10, 15, 20 units at a time, right? And sometimes these smaller units produce more cash flow than the bigger ones anyway.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing, man. And I love that you're like looking all over, right? Like, North Carolina, these spots. I mean, not many people are like going to Randleman. I know where Randleman is.
I saw that little smirk when you said Randleman, and I saw Tim's face. So I was like, oh, he knows where that is.
it's a little stop on 73 just north of Asheboro, between Asheboro and Greensboro. It's been there forever. But most people aren't, when most people are looking at the Carolinas, they're like give me Greensboro, Charlotte, and Raleigh, right? And you're like, there's plenty to be had in between too, guys.
Okay, cool. If you like low cap rates, come on down. No, I know.
Right.
We bought Tim
Well,
and I
well,
bought
too,
a flex warehouse from Chris and Tom in Columbia that we're working on. And I always text Chris and Tom, asking, hey man, where's the next one? I see, you and Jason keep doing all these deals together. When do I start getting access to these good deals? And of course, you know what they say is keep the best, wholesale the rest. So,
all right.
Yeah. I think there might be a little bit of a
well,
delay
it works out really nicely for Chris and I because yep.
No.
Go ahead.
There we go. I was just gonna say it works out nicely for Chris and I that we're different. We play to each other's strong suits, and Chris doesn't really have much interest at all in finances and accounting, taxes, insurance, any of that stuff. And to me, that's the world that I came from. So all that stuff is very easy and light and doesn't take very long for me to do it all. And he's really good at finding deals. So if we can, plus the fact too that him and I both are generating capital to be able to do some of these deals on our own. He's actively wholesaling stuff. I'm actively flipping stuff. So we don't have to scale to bring in a whole bunch of other partners or to syndicate. And, I think that's super important thing, just, that I want to at least address to people that are listening that are still getting their feet wet or learning new things. Like, just because you listen to this podcast doesn't mean that you need to syndicate, or just because you listen to this podcast doesn't mean that you need to flip houses and buy apartments. And we all get the shiny object syndrome, and I would definitely encourage you to go down some of those rabbit trails a little bit to learn more about them, see how they work, figure out what you do and don't want to do. But that's the beautiful thing about real estate is all of it works. Just find what fits for you, what you want to do. And for me, the simplicity of owning stuff primarily on my own, just flipping houses and buying apartments, I'm having a blast. It's a lot of fun.
Right. I think, there's so much value there. I mean, figuring out what works for you is so important. You get a little envy looking at other people doing big deals, small deals, what have you, right? But there's no wrong way to make money in this business, and there's so many different options. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it is words of encouragement to people to go out there and try a couple different things. Don't get the shiny object syndrome, but figure out what works best for you, your risk tolerance, your access to deals and money. Like, not everybody's going to have the same access to all of those three things. So you might as well figure out what works best for you. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. That's all the time we got for today. Jason, I appreciate you coming on here, man. Hope to see you Thursday. And
Yep.
without anything else, I appreciate you, spreading the knowledge and sharing your story with everybody else here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Jason, great to meet you, man.
You too.
Peace.
See ya.
See ya.